Hello and welcome back. This is part 3 of the Lacey Loo doll making tutorial. So if you've just joined us, there's 2 other parts, so it would be great if you went back and watched those because you've missed loads of information. So the part that we're at now is we've got Lacey's head stuffed and we're going to do some stuffing on the body. You can see the head's quite firm. If you've watched the last video, you can see that it's much more firmer now. And we'll close this gap in a second. I'm going to show you a ladder stitch. Okay, so she's fairly firm here, and now the edges is nice and smooth, and her little face has got its full expression, and she's ready for the rest of her body. Right, so this section here is a fairly complicated shape to fill. Not complicated, but this section here, the neck and the shoulders, is very important structurally for the doll because it's this part here that supports the head. Okay, so we need to make sure that this part is stuffed as firmly as we possibly can get it, and that can be a little bit frustrating sometimes, and it takes a while. You know, I find that this isn't a quick process for me. It would take me a good maybe an hour, you know. I just get a nice big cup of tea and take my time and really sculpt this shape out. So how I like to do that, first of all, is give the full body a light, even stuffing first of all. And the reason I do this is if you try and go straight in here and fill the neck really firmly, you keep on putting stuffing on, and it just doesn't work straight away. If this, you know, if you're filling the neck and the rest of the body is empty, because what stuffing likes to do is when you put it onto a small tight space, the minute you let that go, it expands. So every time, it's just I used to be really frustrated with this. Every time you stuff that neck and you're trying to get it on really tight, every time you let it go, it moves down and out. Alright, so I find that if I give this body shape a light, even stuffing all over first, and then I can go on and do what we call detail stuffing. So I can start to really build up this shape and really build up those shoulders. And again, it'll take way more stuffing than you think that you need. So let's do a little bit of that now. We won't have time to do it all, but again, take a handful of stuffing and tease it onto a sort of strip. Alright, grab one end of it with your hemostats. And of course, you know, before I had these, I would use pencils and stuff, or knitting needles, and I mean, I guess I got the job done, but I would end up going through the seams and busting the seams and stuff too. So again, it'll make it really easy with a set of hemostats. So I'm taking, there's my hemostat there, I'm going right and I'm putting stuffing and right where I want it. Okay, I'm not worried about, I'm just giving everything a light fill first of all. And do a bit of a strip. I'm good on there. And so this turning gap might have seemed a little bit small when you were stitching, but it's more than adequate. Don't be tempted to leave a huge turning gap. Okay, so now I'm just going to go down here and give this a light fill, and I'm not really even worried about too much about neatness or smoothness at this stage. Just get tease it onto a strip and get it on. Okay, now I'm not even, That's not even what I would call a light even stuffing. We're still quite empty here. Tease onto a strap. Again, no need to be delicate. No need to be over rough either, but your piece isn't going to come apart. You can be right. I would kind of call that a light even stuffing. Let me just grab some more here. Right, so now what I would do is I'm going to start working up here. Again, the neck and the shoulder area is very important for the sort of structure of your doll. When you put on the doll arms as well, we stitch through this area, so it's also quite important. These are going to support the arms too. So I've taken, same thing, a handful, teased it into a strip. And sometimes what I like to do is take a little bit at the end and twist it, just so that there's a little bit more density to the end of it, especially for shapes like this. And now here I'm not going into the stuffing, I'm going to go up over the top of it. Can you see? You sort of see where the hemostats is going, and I'm going to place that stuffing exactly where I want it, right up here. I'm going to open the hemostats and let that stuffing go, and then with the rest of it then I can do the same thing. Can you see how this hemostats is going right up under there? Right, and this kind of firmness here is what we're really looking for the rest of it. Now I'll start working on the shoulders, and I'm pushing in, pushing in. Yep, and then I will go down and do a little bit of work down here. What we're aiming for is this. You see this shape here? They're all completely filled out. We've got a nice rounded base here, and the neck and the shoulders is really firm. So it's gonna, I'm pushing on there too, look, it's really firm. So at this stage then you just keep on detail stuff, and now this is great, but here's quite empty here. So you want to just keep on smaller pieces and really just like getting right on there. Placing the stuffing exactly where you want it to go. Yeah. So put on your favourite movie or your favourite show and get a nice big cup of tea or a coffee and just take your time and just work at it and keep on building it up. You can see we can then use the hemostats to work exactly right on here, so we can fill all this out. And like I said, there will be a stage during the stuffing where you think this has gone horribly wrong, but trust me, it hasn't. Just keep going. And so this is what we're looking for, is that kind of, she's a little softer down here, but up here she's firm, and the neck as well. Same with the legs. If you can get the feet as firm as possible, and she's fairly firm here and a little bit softer up at the top. Leave this part a little bit softer so she can sit up a little easier. If this is overstuffed here, she'll just keep flattening out and falling down. Okay, so then you do the same with your arms. So now we have, if we move this to the side, is the stuffing out of the way. A really messy crafter. So we have our body, the legs attached, everything stuffed, our two arms stuffed, and the head. At this stage now, I go and I close all the gaps using a ladder stitch, and I'll just show you that now. Ladder stitch is sometimes called a mattress stitch, and it's an invaluable stitch, you know. It's a really good technique, especially if you like toy making, doll making, or if that's something that you like to get into. It's a sort of essential technique, I think. A ladder stitch is used to close gaps, and it'll end up looking almost identical to this seam here. So it's sometimes called a hidden stitch as well, I think. But it's also great for attaching two pieces together as well. So if you're making a bear, you could use it to attach the muzzle to the head, or we're going to attach the ears to Lacey's head with it in a second as well. We'll even attach the head when we're putting the head onto the neck. We'll use a ladder stitch as well. So it's a really good stitch to have in your arsenal. So what we do is, let me get that excess stuff and just down on there, get in our way. So for the first stitch, I come down and underneath. Can you see there? I'm just coming up one side of the seam, kind of where the stitches already are, if you can see that. Right, and then we're ready to go. And it's called a ladder stitch because it has like rungs on a ladder, and that's a good way to remind yourself that your stitches should be straight like the rungs on a ladder, not diagonal. If they're diagonal, once you pull the stitch closed, you'll get a puckered seam. Alright, so I'm going to so my threads come up on this side below the seam, and I'm going to go to the other side of the seam and just take a small straight stitch. Can you see that? That's all your needle's doing. Alright, pull, and then I'm going to go straight across. So I want my thread straight across to the lower part of the seam. Alright, and I'm going to do that just from side to side to close the gap. You see I've started maybe 1/4 of an inch before the turning gap. It just gives a smoother shape once you pull it closed. Alright, and even though it's fairly invisible, I still like to put the turning gaps, like this stitch here, in places that you wouldn't really see it. So you can notice it's on the back of the upper arm, it's on the top of the head that's going to be covered with hair, and the same with the leg, it's on the back seam up at the top. It's always just a good practice. It gives you a good finished piece. So after every few, maybe every ½ inch or so, you just pull it tight. I'm using black thread so we can see better. Can you see? Okay, so you just keep going with that, and that's your ladder stitch. It's really simple. And this is the stitch that we'll use as well, like I said, to attach Lacey's ears, which we won't do now. We'll do once the head's on and her arms is on. And then that's us. We'll be finished then. I'm rushing this now, so you see? Okay, so don't leave, if you leave, pull your stitches taut every ½ inch or so. If you leave it too long, you put too much pressure on your thread and your thread will nip. Okay, so every ½ inch or so, just pull them taut. It's also really good actually if your kids or your grandkids have a beloved toy that the seam has busted, get the ladder stitch out and you'll not even see it, and they'll be so impressed. It's good for repairing. If you have jeans that have ripped on the seam, it's really good for that as well. Okay, and I will just, and what's happened here is, let's see, once we pull it tight, what happens. I'm going to run my needle in there and just make sure that that is going where I want it to go. See, I just snipped that thread. So there we go, that's a ladder stitch. That one's a little bit messy, but it's going to be covered with hair anyway, so that's it. Okay, so you'll do that with the back of the legs, the back of the body, and your 2 arms. Done. And the next step, so let's yeah, let's try to do this as quick as possible. I could talk about doll making, I could stay here all night and talk for hours about it. So what we're going to do is, to attach the head to the neck, we are going to cut here. I know that sounds a bit alarming, don't be worried about it, it's totally fine. So I think in the instructions I wrote that I've measured maybe 1.5 inches from the bottom of the chin. I'm just going to make a little mark here. And I cut small to begin with, because you can always cut a little bit more. Don't be afraid though. Alright, so that's definitely not going to be big enough, so we're going to, that's where the neck's going to be. Let's do a little bit more. Right, and then I'm going to like make a channel or so. We'll use these. Make a channel in the stuffing, sort of. If you find that even though there's too much stuffing, you can remove a little bit. So, and then the neck goes up in here like that. And like already that's fairly secure. You will have to stitch it to keep it there, but it's fairly secure at the minute. So now, pins. I'm going to pin this. And the way I like to pin it, now I don't want you to pin it like this, the way you kind of normally would. I want you to pin down through the head and the neck, so you make sure you're pinning through the 2 the whole way around. And then what we'll do is do a ladder stitch just like we did when we were closing all those turning gaps. You work a ladder stitch the whole way around. So I like to start here, work my way around, and under here it gets a little bit finicky. But if you have stitched all this already, then it's easy to kind of maneuver this a little bit and the head won't come off. Whereas if you started down there, it would keep falling off the neck. Okay, so kind of start here, work your way around, or opposite. And then by the time you come to here, you can kind of maneuver the head a little bit. And so that's Lacey Loo's head on. I just don't have time to stitch it all for you, or we would. Now, arms next, and then ears, and we're done. Okay, so just make sure that your arms is in the right position, so the thumbs are facing outwards. Alright, and that brings me to my other tool that's very handy, and that is a doll needle. This is a huge sewing needle, and it's a very traditional tool used in teddy bear making and things like that, and it's perfect for this kind of thing, because we're going to be stitching through an arm, through the shoulders, and the other arm back and forth, and so we need a big long needle for that, and they're very strong as well. So I like to, let's get some, we'll just use some embroidery thread now for the purpose of this, but I like to get a nice strong sewing thread, even one with a little bit of polyester or nylon on it for strength. Try to add a large knot if you can. So for example, this is one of the areas that you would definitely need to put together by hand. Alright, so I will pass through Okay, so I'm passing through the shoulder first of all, and I'll add one of the arms here. Okay? And you have a little bit of wiggle room for the first 2 or 3 passes to kind of maneuver if your shoulder ends up too high or too low. You still have a little bit of wiggle room for the first 2 or 3 stitches before you start, you know, pulling everything taut. So I like to just make sure that my needle, and I'll keep pulling the needle back until it comes out in the right area for me. So just kind of very centered there. You pull, and then I'm taking like a straight stitch, maybe 1/4 inch side stitch, straight back through again. That's kind of right, so you can see now that my needle is coming out, it's not coming out where I want it, so just keep on pulling back. I want it to come straight out there. Maybe down a little bit. There we go, it's better. And I will put the other arm on. Yeah, and now what you'll do is you'll just keep on passing the needle through arm, shoulder, arm, back and forth, pulling taut but not tight. If you pull tight, it'll start to distort the shape here, and you can see that's a lovely shape. And she has a very fitted neck piece, so you don't want to, if you pull too tight, you would end up with this, and then nothing's going to fit right. So taut but not tight, and you keep passing through. I like to add a button at the end in the last few passes. I'll add a button. A button adds a little bit extra security, and it covers up these stitches. But if you were making this for a little kid to play with, you might want to leave the buttons off, which is options. You totally can. Okay. So you keep doing that until the arms feel very secure, and that is Lacey Loo's arms. This is a technique that you'll see in a lot of doll making patterns or toy making patterns, so it's also a good one to learn. And just remember, if your needle comes out and it's not in the right spot, you keep bringing the needle back until it is. And sometimes you'll feel that you need to maybe lower the stitches a little bit to add more security, or higher them up, etc, etc. So that's us. I would do, I'm only doing this very quick for the purposes of time, but I would definitely do at least maybe 8-9 passes. And when you're finished with that, so now her arms feel very secure, yeah. When I'm finished now, instead of trying to knot it off, you can add the buttons like I said in the last few passes, and to fasten off, I just take the needle down and through the body, and maybe come out somewhere down here on the seam, and that's it. Cut the thread, you don't need any knots, that'll keep everything secure for you. So Lacey Loo now has a head and she has some arms. So what she needs now is ears, and we'll really quickly do that. Then you'll find all the instructions for adding her hair and making all her clothes in the downloadable pattern. Maybe perhaps if we get some time in the future, we will make a full series of Lacey Loo's clothes and stuff as well. But for now, I think the most important part is the body. And it's good to hear some little tips and tricks, because the clothes is really fairly simple and straightforward. So her ears. Ears is really simple. 2 pieces, right sides together, and you stitch along the top and down along the outer edge. You leave this inner edge open. So this is the part that's going to be attached to her head, right? So we leave that open, and then we turn this out the right way. Now, you could, if you can see that, you could leave it like this and not turn it out the right way. You could, this could just be your right side. However, I like to, when you turn it out the right way, you get this sort of nice kind of rolled edge when you top stitch it. And just kind of adds to the dimension of the shape of her ear. So you turn it out the right way. Let's use these little guys here. See what just happened there? That's what I used to do all the time with pencils. So this is the smallest hemostat. It's fairly narrow here, so that's probably why I don't lift it too much. There's such a thing as an awl as well, AWL. It's really good for like pressing out little corners and stuff as well, but again, it's fairly sharp, so you need to be careful that you don't bust the seams. So that's my elf ear turned out the right way. I will usually clip it, maybe down here somewhere. And then really basically it's really easy. We just top stitch along the top and the outer edge, and then I just sketch on like a nice little swirl, shape. And then she is attached to either side. We're running out of time.